27 books, that's all that made it in. Out of dozens of Gospels, letters, and apocalypses circulating in the ancient world, only 27 were selected for the New Testament. No single vote, no emperor's decree. And the question that everyone asks, from best-selling novelists to university professors, is the same: who decided, and did they get it right? In 2003, Dan Brown told 80 million readers that the Roman Emperor Constantine chose the books of the Bible at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. It's a great story. It's also completely wrong. Even Bart Ehrman, one of the world's most prominent skeptical scholars, has said bluntly, Dan Brown's claims about the Council of Nicaea and the formation of the Canon are simply wrong. The Canon was not decided at Nicaea, so if it wasn't an emperor's decree, what was it? This is not a sermon, it's an investigation, and this is the final episode. Over the past 3 episodes, we've examined the Bible from 3 angles. We looked at the manuscript evidence, 5,800 Greek copies, more than any other ancient text by an order of magnitude. We checked the archaeological record, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Tel Dan stele, the Pilate inscription, the Pool of Siloam. We interrogated the witnesses, the eyewitness question, the dating of the Gospels, the creed in 1 Corinthians that dates to within 5 years of the crucifixion. Now comes the final question. These texts exist, they're well preserved, the world they describe is archaeologically confirmed, the witnesses have a credible claim to being close to the events, but who decided which texts belonged in the Bible and which ones didn't? The word canon comes from the Greek kanon, a measuring rod, a standard. In the context of the Bible, it means the list of books recognized as authoritative scripture. And the first thing you need to know is that this list was not created at a single moment. It emerged over centuries. The process was gradual, messy, and, at the margins, genuinely contested. But it was not arbitrary, and it was not a conspiracy. Here's the timeline. By roughly 100 AD, all 27 books of the New Testament had been written and were circulating among early Christian communities. By 110 AD, 3 early church fathers, Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch, and Polycarp of Smyrna, were quoting 25 of those 27 books in their letters. By 170 AD, we have the Muratorian Fragment, the oldest known canon list, which includes approximately 22 of the 27 books. And in 367 AD, Athanasius, the Bishop of Alexandria, wrote his annual Easter letter listing exactly the 27 books we have today. The councils of Hippo in 393 and Carthage in 397 formally ratified this list. But here's the critical point: they didn't create it. They endorsed what the churches had already been using for generations. So how did the early church decide which books belonged? They applied 4 criteria not formally codified but consistently used across centuries. First, apostolicity. Was the book written by an apostle or a close associate of an apostle? Mark was accepted because of his connection to Peter, Luke because of his connection to Paul. Second, orthodoxy. Was the book consistent with the core Christian teaching, what they called the rule of faith? Third, catholicity. Was the book widely accepted across geographically diverse churches, not just popular in one region? And fourth, traditional use. Had the book been read in worship and used for instruction over a long period? The Muratorian Fragment is a window into this process. Dating to approximately 170 AD, though some scholars argue for a later date, it lists the books that were accepted for public reading in the churches. The 4 Gospels, Acts, Paul's letters, Jude, 1st and 2nd John, Revelation. It also mentions the Apocalypse of Peter with a caveat: some of us will not allow it to be read in church. And it explicitly excludes the Shepherd of Hermas from public worship, not because it's heretical, but because it was written too recently to be apostolic. This is not a power grab, it's a community applying criteria. But what about the books that didn't make it? This is where it gets interesting. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Judas, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache, these are real texts, they exist, you can read them today, and the question is, were they unfairly excluded? But the story of the canon doesn't start with lists, it starts with a crisis. Around 140 AD, a wealthy shipowner named Marcion arrived in Rome and proposed something radical: throw out the entire Old Testament. Keep only an edited version of Luke's Gospel and 10 of Paul's letters. strip away anything that connected Jesus to the God of Israel. Marcion's truncated Bible forced the early church to answer a question it had never formally addressed: which books do we actually consider authoritative? The irony is striking. By trying to narrow the canon, Marcion prompted the church to define it. The first known attempt at a fixed Christian canon was made by a heretic, and the church's response was to articulate, for the first time, which books they had been treating as scripture all along. Let's start with the most famous, the Gospel of Thomas. Discovered in 1945 at Nag Hammadi in Egypt, it's a collection of 114 sayings attributed to Jesus: no narrative, no crucifixion, no resurrection. Some of the sayings overlap with the canonical Gospels. Others are strikingly different. Saying 114 reads, "Simon Peter said to them, 'Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life.' Jesus said, 'I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males. For every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven.'" Most scholars date the Gospel of Thomas to the mid-2nd century, roughly 140 to 180 AD, though a minority argue for an earlier date. Its theology reflects Gnostic ideas: secret knowledge and anti-material worldview, salvation through self-knowledge rather than through the death and resurrection of Jesus. It was excluded not because someone was afraid of it, but because it was late, theologically divergent, and lacked apostolic connection. The Gospel of Peter, dating to roughly 150 to 200 AD, presents a version of the crucifixion where Jesus feels no pain, a theology called Docetism, the idea that Jesus only appeared to have a physical body. It also features a talking cross that emerges from the tomb. The Gospel of Judas, a Sethian Gnostic text from roughly 150 to 180 AD, portrays Judas as the hero, the only disciple who truly understood Jesus' secret teaching. These texts are fascinating. They tell us a great deal about the diversity of early Christianity, but they are later than the canonical Gospels, theologically incompatible with the earliest Christian proclamation, and were never widely accepted by the churches that had been using the canonical texts for generations. But not everyone agrees that the exclusion was justified. Elaine Pagels, a Princeton professor who won the National Book Award for the Gnostic Gospels, argues that the exclusion of these texts reveals a power struggle. The winners wrote the Bible, she says. The proto-Orthodox Christians didn't just win the theological debate, they suppressed the losers' scriptures. It is the winners who write history their way. Pagels is a serious scholar, and her argument deserves serious engagement. She's right that the proto-Orthodox Church actively opposed Gnostic texts. Irenaeus wrote an entire treatise called Against Heresies. Athanasius explicitly warned against apocryphal books. The process was not purely passive recognition. Bart Ehrman pushes further. In Lost Christianities, he argues that early Christianity was radically diverse: Ebionites who saw Jesus as a human prophet, Marcionites who rejected the Old Testament entirely, Gnostics who believed the material world was created by an ignorant lesser god. The victors in the struggles to establish Christian orthodoxy, Ehrman writes, not only won their theological positions, they also won the scriptures. They decided which books would be included and which would be excluded. Ehrman doesn't claim the process was random, but he insists it was political, contested, and far messier than the traditional narrative suggests. Michael Kruger, a Reformed theological seminary professor who has spent his career studying canon formation, offers a different framework. He argues for what he calls the self-authenticating model. The canon's authority, Kruger contends, is not derived from the Church's decision, it's intrinsic to the books themselves. The Church didn't create the canon, it recognized it. The New Testament canon was not so much a list that was created, he writes, as it was a list that was recognized. And he points to the evidence. The core books were treated as authoritative within decades of their composition, long before any council met, long before any emperor converted, long before any formal list was drawn up. The Big Bang of the canon, as scholars call it, happened in the 1st and 2nd centuries. The councils of the 4th century were ratifying a consensus that was already centuries old. F. Bruce, one of the 20th century's most respected biblical scholars, put it simply: the New Testament books did not become authoritative for the Church because they were formally included in a canonical list. On the contrary, the Church included them in her canon because she already regarded them as divinely inspired. Bruce Metzger, the Dean of New Testament Textual Criticism, and, notably, Bart Ehrman's own doctoral supervisor, agreed the canon was not the result of a series of contests involving church politics. The canon is rather the separation that came about because of the intuitive insight of Christian believers. So what does the evidence actually show? It shows that the canon formation was a historical process, not a single event. It shows that the core of the New Testament, the four Gospels, Acts, Paul's letters, was recognized as authoritative within the first 100 to 150 years. It shows that the debates were real but confined to the margins of books like 2 Peter, Hebrews, and Revelation, not Matthew or Romans. It shows that the excluded texts, the Gnostic Gospels, the Shepherd of Hermas, the Didache, were excluded for identifiable reasons: late dating, theological divergence, lack of apostolic connection, limited circulation. And it shows that the conspiracy theory that Constantine chose the Bible at Nicaea is not a matter of interpretation. It is factually, demonstrably wrong. But let's be precise about what the evidence doesn't show. It doesn't prove that the 27 books are divinely inspired. It doesn't prove that the excluded texts have no value. It doesn't prove that the process was perfect or that every decision was correct. Hebrews was debated for centuries because no one was sure who wrote it. Revelation was controversial in the Eastern churches. 2 Peter is still considered pseudonymous by many scholars. The process was messier than believers typically claim, but it was also far less conspiratorial than skeptics suggest. And now step back. Look at what we've found across 4 episodes. The manuscript evidence is unparalleled among ancient texts, 5,800 Greek copies, with the earliest fragments dating to within decades of the originals. The archaeological record confirms significant portions of the biblical world: the Pool of Siloam, the Pilate inscription, the Tel Dan stele, the Dead Sea Scrolls. The eyewitness question remains a live scholarly debate, but the earliest testimony, the Creed in 1 Corinthians 15, dates to within 1 to 5 years of the events, and is accepted by atheist scholars as historically certain. And the selection process, while gradual and contested at the margins, applied identifiable criteria and produced a remarkably early consensus. The evidence doesn't prove the Bible is divinely inspired, but it presents a textual tradition, an archaeological record, an eyewitness framework, and a selection process that are far more rigorous than most people assume. Dismissing the Bible as a book of myths ignores a mountain of evidence. Claiming it fell from heaven ignores a messy historical process. The truth, as usual, is more interesting than either caricature, and it is a truth that demands, at the very least, serious engagement. 4 episodes, 4 questions. How well was it preserved? Does the ground confirm it? Who wrote it and were they there? And how was it assembled? The answers don't settle the question of faith, they never could. But they do settle this: the Bible is not a book you can dismiss without examining the evidence. And the evidence, whether you end up believing or not, is worth your time. The investigation is yours now.